Okay, welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star. So this class here, this is just I've done some series recently, but this will just be a one-shot, one-off class, kind of replacing, because there's not an ongoing series going on this month, and because we can't meet in person, I figured we could just do it, just a one-time class to kind of replace our local monthly class. And then in August, I'll be starting up a new series on the Sephiroth, probably a little bit more of a relaxed schedule than the last class series we did, maybe just like maybe twice a month, probably on Sunday afternoons again. That seemed to work well for a lot of people. But so for July, we'll just have this one-off class. And so we'll be talking about the Holy Books of Thelema today. So there's a lot to say, and I'll try to keep it to an hour and a half. No promises, but I'll do my best. Okay, so let's just sort of jump right into it with the question, what are the Holy Books of Thelema? Now, I want to suggest that the phrase holy book itself is a little bit of a loose, vague term, and that Crowley kind of uses it in different ways. There's different publications called the Holy Books that may not always contain all and only exactly what we think of the Holy Books being. So I would suggest that, that we talk about the Holy Books of Thelema in a slightly, take it as a slightly informal term, but fortunately Crowley gives us some very precise and formal language for defining something that doesn't have exactly precisely the same meaning of holy book, but is clearer. So in the AA curriculum, there are 5 classes of texts that Crowley uses. All publications of the AA are in one of these 5 classes, or nearly all. There's a few texts that Crowley sort of never assigned a class to or something like that, but theoretically, all AA texts are in this class, or in one of these classes, or more than one, as we'll see. Though not everything written by Crowley is in one of those classes. Okay, so there are classes A, B, C, D, and E. So class A, and I've got quotations here from one of the main AA texts here defining the nature of them. So class A consists of books of which may be changed not so much as the style of a letter. That is, they represent the utterance of an adept entirely beyond the criticism of even the visible head of the organization. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. I didn't give you any examples here because we're going to talk about all of the Class A texts. And so I'll just quickly go through the other classes, just so you have a little introduction to them and so that you can sort of see the contrast with Class A. The Class B consists of books or essays which are the result of ordinary scholarship, enlightened and earnest. Some examples of this are some of the core instructions of AA, like Liber E, the sort of basic instructions in yoga, Liber O, the basic instructions in ceremonial magic, Liber Liberi, that's the Book of the Balance, an important instructional text, Crowley's book, 8 Lectures on Yoga, and many others besides. Then Class C consists of matter which is to be regarded rather as suggestive than anything else. A number of Class C texts are poetry or even fiction, not sort of any fiction of Crowley's. These are things that are still meant to be, AA instructions, but they're not. They're even more suggestive than Class B. And again, a lot of them are kind of a literary or take like a fictional form. The Wake World is an example of this. The Wake World is essentially a Qabalistic fairy tale. We also have the Soldier and the Hunchback, which in form you might expect it to be more like Class B, but I think it's a very kind of experimental sort of work where Crowley's groping for answers. He didn't want to give it quite the dignity that like Class B would have, so he put it into Class C. And then I also listed Aha, which is one of Crowley's poems, but again, it has it expresses the mystical and magical process, and so it's included as as part of the AA curriculum and not simply one of Crowley's poems. Class D consists of official rituals and instructions of AA. These are very formal kind of official rituals. They include unpublished things like the AA grade initiation ceremonies and a few other things. Also things like Liber Reguli, Liber Jugorum, Liber Resh. And also I wanted to mention Liber Causae here because Liber Causae is sometimes thought to be a holy book or is confused with them. And the reason for this is that it's included in the publication, the book, the Holy Books of Thelema. So, like this copy here of the Holy Books, right? that many of you probably have or are familiar with. Liber A'ash is the first text in that book, and it's included there as an introduction to the Holy Books, but isn't actually one of them directly. It's an introductory book. It doesn't have the same inspired character that the Class A texts have, and so it's Class D. But it is an official and important instruction of AA. And then finally, Class E is the smallest class and was actually added later. I think Crowley added it in like 1917 or 18, I want to say. That includes things like the Law of Liberty, De Lege Libellum, Cabs on Pecht, and I think just like one other. So that was a new class that he created, sort of promulgations of the Law of Thelema. So just to say a few more words about Class A here, Crowley's saying here this thing about how it's beyond the criticism of even the visible head of the organization. That includes Aleister Crowley himself. He himself felt that he had no right to change, even the style of a letter in these books. They were written, well, we'll talk a little bit about his experience of the method of their composition, but the point here is that they are beyond, sort of human reason and human understanding, and so that a human person or a human ego is unable to criticize them or to change them. Okay. Why isn't my slide advancing? Here we go. Okay, so here is the list of the main AA publications in Class A. We'll see more things that also, actually, no, I want to jump back for just 1 second. There's also some hybrid text class numbering or class designation that you should be aware of. Like, for example, the Book of Lies is mainly in Class C, but some of the chapters of Book of the Lies, like chapter 25 is the text of the star ruby, chapter 36 is the text of the star sapphire. And so those, as official rituals of AA, are considered Class D. So individual works may contain stuff from multiple classes. For example, Book 4, the big blue brick, that contains material from classes A, B, D, and E, and maybe some Class C as well. But that's because it's compiling a lot of different things. Like the main text of Book 4 would be kind of Class B, but sometimes they contain like other things as pieces of a larger text. Okay, so here's the list of the major AA publications in Class A, at least the ones that are kind of fully and completely only within Class A and are works sort of in and of their own right. Like I said, we'll see a few other things that are either hybrid or are like comments on another text. So there's 14 things listed here. Now, you might think, oh, okay, there's 14 holy books then. But there's a few kind of complex issues here. One of those is that 2 of these things in the list here are both the Book of the Law. If you look at, let's see, what is that, 5 bullet point numbering down, we see L, Liber Legis, the Book of the Law, subfigura 31. This is the holograph of the text. This is the actual reproduction of Crowley's handwritten text. And then if you look, there's that 5 from the bottom, nice symmetry there. You see Liber L, well Legis, subfigura 220. And so this is the manuscript text of the Book of the Law, right? That's not in Crowley's handwriting. Now there are some differences between those 2 texts, right? Which a lot of you are probably familiar with. And we're not really going to talk much about the Book of the Law. I mean, it'll come up incidentally throughout the course of our discussions, but I really want to focus on the other 12 things here. One other reason that there might be a little ambiguity in how many of these texts there are is we see Libra Archanarum, the fourth from the bottom there, is actually in a way 2 separate texts that are put together. So yeah, there's a little bit of room for asking, there's still this kind of question of how many of them there are exactly and how we want to number them, but it's not a particularly, I think, significant question. But yeah, this is the main list of our Class A texts here. And so we'll be going through, other than the Book of the Law, we'll be going through all of the other 12 of them tonight, some in more detail than others, as we'll see. All right, and then there's a few additional Class A texts. So these, the 2 that you see at the top there, these are texts that are considered in Class A, but are not full works in their own right. The first is the comment on the Book of the Law, is often known as the short comment or the Tunis comment, and we'll look at that in just a second. And then the second one is a note upon Liber 963. Liber 963 is the treasure house of images. Now, this isn't even by Crowley, the main book, the Treasure House of Images. This is by J.F.C. Fuller, who was a member of the AA for a while in the very early days. So he wrote this book called The Treasure House of Images. It's an interesting text and worth reading. Let's see. I have my copy of it here somewhere, but anyways, yeah, you can pick it up. You can find it fairly inexpensively. It's a set of adorations around the zodiac signs, and then there's 12 zodiac signs, and then there's a kind of 13th, and a lot of the book is sort of structured around the Kabbalah of the number 13, meaning unity, and also sort of beyond the 12, the unity that's beyond the multiplicity, and so yeah, it's adorations for practical usage, and so Crowley wrote. A comment on this, and he considered the comment to be in the class A. So if you pick up a copy of it, you'll see at the beginning, like a note upon Liber 963. That comment itself, Crowley considered to be inspired in the same way that the other holy books were inspired, but he and no one else has ever really considered it to be a holy book in its own right. So we're not going to deal with it tonight, but just something to be aware of. And then there are two hybrid books that are in class AB. Sometimes you'll see this written just as AB, sometimes as like A-B, but it means the same thing. And these are the Liber 418, the Vision and the Voice, and then the Paris working. And you can see I've listed out their full names here. We won't be talking about either of these in much detail. The Vision and the Voice we'll reference a few times. But we won't have time to go through it in detail. That's something maybe we could do a future class about. The Vision of the Voice is a huge text with so much in it that, yeah, it would really demand a whole class all in itself. And so this idea that they're a hybrid between A and B is because they actually have a number of things in common. But the main thing is that they are records of magical workings. And so in both of these, Crowley actually was assisted by Victor Neuberg in both of these workings. And so it's most clear in 418, the Vision and the Voice, where Crowley is scrying the aethers and then describing what's happening. And Neuberg is taking down the dictation and is writing down everything that Crowley's saying. And so the idea would be that when Crowley is directly reporting the speech of one of the angels or one of the entities that he's encountering, or sometimes in other texts, he's not always clear to distinguish between what's class A and what's class B. There's definitely some ambiguity about it. But when he's sort of directly speaking inspired words, that would be class A. And then when he's just describing what's happening to him, maybe he feels a sensation or he sees a certain image and he's describing what it's like, or just putting the record down, that's class B, because those are Crowley's own words. I mean, he's describing a vision that he's not creating, but they are his words. And so that would be like class B. But again, if you actually read the text, there's not going to be a clear line between what's class A and what's class B, but just know that that's sort of how the breakdown works, and that's why they're considered hybrid texts. And then the Paris working is a similar thing. Crowley and Neuberg undertook a series of magical workings, sex magic workings in Paris. And same thing, when they're channeling, you're directly, not necessarily channeling, but when the words themselves are directly inspired, that's class A. And then when they're just sort of describing what happened or describing what they did, that would be like class B. But neither of these texts are ever considered to be holy books. And they're not included in publications of the holy books. Although the Vision and the Voice really is sort of in a deep interrelationship with the holy books. Both the holy books that were received before it kind of reappear as parts of it, and then holy books that come later are very much continuing lines of thought that are in the Vision and the Voice. So even if we're not considering it to be fully a holy book in its own right, it's kind of part of the series, and I think that you can't really understand the holy books as a whole without also understanding the Vision and the Voice. So again, we may not technically consider it a holy book, but in my mind anyways, it's basically one of them. All right, so I just wanted to show you the short comment here. A lot of you have probably seen it. It's often called the short comment or the Tunis comment. Tunis was the city that he was in when he wrote it. Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before. We're not really going to discuss it, but just know that this comment, unlike Crowley's other comments, the stuff that's published in like the Law is for All, where you have both the new comment and the old comment, that stuff is not Class A. That's Crowley's, his ego, his intellect, also his magical experience, and of course, and all of that. But that's Crowley, the man, doing an interpretation, whereas this text was considered to be inspired. Although it is a Class A text, I think that there's a lot of room for individual interpretation and individual understanding, of what this means and how the directions should be followed out. The very first line, after do what thou wilt for the whole of the law, that line, the study of this book is forbidden. Certainly Crowley never tried to prevent anyone from studying the book of the law, and none of his successors in AA have done the same either. So whatever that sentence means, you're not allowed to study this book, right? And so the fact that that sentence definitely shouldn't be taken literally, I think, opens up the possibility of room for interpretation in the rest of it as well. And hopefully people can be, I've sometimes seen sort of conflict, especially online, about what this means and how it should be taken. But hopefully we can have plenty of latitude and respect for different reasonable interpretations of what this means, what its significance is, how important it is, and how it should be followed out. Okay, so let's, so now we've got that. Let's see, was a question here? Oh, yes, yep, the recording is running. So yeah, it will, and that'll be up on the forum for members to have access to. Okay, so now we're just going to focus on those main 12 texts, the main holy books other than the Book of the Law for the rest of our time here. All right, so I'm going to read you two quotes from Crowley where he talks a little bit about what these are and what his experience of them is like. So this is from the Equinox of the Gods. The Equinox of the Gods is like part 4 of book 4. It's most especially an account of the reception of the Book of the Law. And if you're interested in the story, because we're not going to get into it tonight, but if you're interested in the story of how the Book of the Law was received and all the other kind of stuff surrounding the Book of the Law, like the Stellae of Revealing and the event called the Equinox of the Gods, this text, the Equinox of the Gods, is definitely one of the main places to begin. But I'll just read the quote. So he says, "Note, moreover, with what greedy vanity I claim authorship even of all the other AA books in Class A." He means other than the Book of the Law. "Though I wrote them inspired beyond all I know to be I. Yet in these books did Aleister Crowley, the master of English both in prose and in verse, partake insofar as he was that. Compare those books with the Book of the Law. The style is simple and sublime." He means the style of the other holy books, the ones we'll be talking about tonight. "The style is simple and sublime. The imagery is gorgeous and faultless. The rhythm is subtle and intoxicating. The theme is interpreted in faultless symphony. There are no errors of grammar, no infelicities of phrase. Each book is perfect in its kind. I, daring to snatch credit for these, dared no wise to lay claim to have touched the Book of the Law, not with my littlest fingertip." So you can see that even though the Book of the Law and these other 12 that we'll be talking about tonight, even though they're all in Class A and are all considered inspired and that cannot be changed as much as the style of a letter, still Crowley's making a distinction between the Book of the Law and the others, where he's saying he's taking he doesn't experience himself to be the author of the Book of the Law in any sense whatsoever, whereas these other holy books, although inspired, or written by something beyond all he knows to be himself, he still feels himself to be in some sense the author of them. And obviously he's being kind of funny here about the greedy vanity of claiming authorship of them and all that. All right, and then another quote here. This is from his the Confessions, right? This is his autobiography or autohagiography, right? The hagiography is like the biography of a saint. So autohagiography is the autobiography of a saint, which is a somewhat joking title. There's definitely a sense of humor going on there. All right, so this is from the Confessions, where he's talking about his experience receiving the holy books. He says, "The Spirit came upon me, and I wrote a number of books in a way which I hardly know how to describe. They were not taken from dictation like the Book of the Law, Nor were they my own composition. I cannot even call them automatic writing. I can only say that I was not wholly conscious at the time of what I was writing, and I felt that I had no right to change so much as the style of a letter. They were written with the utmost rapidity, without pausing for thought for a single moment, and I have not presumed to revise them. Perhaps plenary inspiration is the only adequate phrase, and this has become so discredited that people are loath to admit the possibility of such a thing. The prose of these books, the chief of which are Liber Cordis Cincti Serpenti and Liber Liberi vel Lapidus Lazuli, is wholly different from anything that I have written myself. It is characterized by a sustained sublimity of which I am totally incapable, and it overrides all the intellectual objections which I should myself have raised. It does not admit the need to explain itself to anyone, even to me. I cannot doubt that these books are the work of an intelligence independent of my own. So again, even though in that last quote we saw, he was making the distinction and saying that he's still the author of them, here he's saying that it is an intelligence independent of his own. And really that it's a process that he doesn't really even understand. I think not only is he saying that the books didn't even bother to explain themselves to him, right? That he, even though he sort of authored them in some sense, still had to go through all the same work of interpreting them and understanding them that any reader has to go through. That he didn't necessarily have a sense of what was the intended meaning of them. He had to read them and work through them, just like we all do. Yeah, so it's interesting to see him, even at different times, saying slightly different things about it, and this sense that he doesn't even really understand, what exactly has happened. The Spirit came upon him, and something just happened. A text came through him or from him. And so I think it's important to keep all of that in mind. And as we'll see, some of the holy books themselves will actually kind of dramatize or even sort of question the nature of their reception and the nature of their authorship. So we'll see this as a theme going in, that even the books themselves kind of take up the theme of their own composition and their own authorship and their own interpretation. I'll say more about that in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief timeline of the reception of the Class A texts. So the first thing I've got here in 1900, Crowley later couldn't remember if this was in August or in November. This was when he was in Mexico. He receives the first two parts of what later becomes the Vision and Voice. So he scries the 30 aethers in the Enochian system, kind of like the tree of life in an initiatory system. You're starting at the bottom and working up. So the 30th aether is the first one that you would scry, and then you work your way up towards the first aether, and they get increasingly sort of higher and more rarefied and also more difficult to access. So he began this in 1900 and scribed the first two, and then just other things came up, and he broke off the work and didn't return to it for nearly 9 years. But it's only later that this becomes part of like a Class A text. For a while, they're just records of some magical work that he did. All right, and then in April of 1904, Crowley receives the Book of the Law. Again, we're not going to get into that story, though it's an important one. And I assume most of you, or many of you anyways, have at least some basic familiarity with that story. All right, and then, so that's in 1904, he receives the Book of the Law, and then he does some further magical work, has some further initiations of his own, and then in kind of late fall into winter of 1907, the rest of the holy books begin to come. So on October 29th of 1907, he receives, this is Liber 7, Liber Liberi. He receives that all. Liber Liberi is slightly longer than the Book of the Law. It contains, I think, a few hundred more words than the Book of the Law has. Now, the Book of the Law was received, over the course of 3 days. Each chapter was dictated in the course of an hour, which is very fast. I know some people who have done, kind of as an exercise on those days, like having one person read out the Book of the Law, or read out a chapter slowly, so that it takes an hour to read the whole thing, and then they sort of play the scribe and transcribe it all as an exercise. And it's quite difficult. I've heard. I've never tried it, but people talk about their hands really cramping up and it being a real struggle, to get through the whole thing. But Liber Liberi is written even faster. His diary records that he wrote the whole thing in 2.5 continuous hours, and it's even longer. So he's writing extremely fast. All right, and then the very next day, he begins to receive parts of Liber 65. When I converted to the PDF, Liber 65 got kind of pushed out of line there, but that doesn't mean anything. Yeah, so over the course of like the next 4 days after that, or 4 or 5 days after that, he receives the chapters of Liber 65. And then later that month, he receives Liber Stellae Rubeae. And then going on into the winter of 1907 into early 1908, he receives portions of, we'll talk about this, he receives portions of Liber Archanarum, but not the whole thing. He also receives Liber Portalucas, Liber Tau, Liber Zadi, and Liber Trigrammaton. And we'll talk about all of these in more detail. Then there's a gap for a few years. In 1909, he, with Victor Neuburg, undertakes the scrying of the rest of the aethers, and this is the text of the Vision and the Voice. From in just about a month, he scries the remaining 28 aethers, and the record of that is the text, the Vision and the Voice. And then in 1910, this is when J.F.C. Fuller writes and then publishes the Treasure House of Images. That's when that note that I mentioned gets written, and so I've included it here just for. Again, we're not going to be talking about it much today, but I just included it here for your information. And then the next year, in 1911, he receives the remainder of the Holy Books. Now, Crowley eventually loses his diaries for 1911, and I think for most of at least 1907 as well. So we don't know what order they were received in 1911, and there's not a lot of detail. And actually, I think it's in the Confessions. He actually gets some of the texts, which ones were received in 1907 and which ones in 1911. He gets them slightly mixed up. So this seems to be the kind of reconstructed timeline as far as we can tell. All right, and then a couple years later, from the very end of December through mid-February of 1914, this is when Crowley and Neuburg undertake the series of workings called the Paris Working. And then the short comment, the little comment on the Book of Law that we saw earlier, that's written in 1925. So the main things to take here from is just that the Book of Law is 1904, and then the Holy Books are received in sort of two groups, one group in 1907, and then a second group in 1911, with the Vision and the Voice in between. And a lot of magical work of Crowley's as well. From kind of around the time that the Holy Books first start coming in 1907, that's around the time that he takes the Oath of the Abyss, the oath to become a Magister of the Temple. And then the Vision and the Voice is the kind of culmination of that working. And then so the rest in 1911 are written after he's completed this working and become a Master of the Temple. So Crowley himself has changed substantially along this time, which is another interesting thing to keep in mind. Looks like some people are having trouble. It's usually probably your own connection. Okay, yeah, other people are hearing all right. But the recording will be available online, or for members anyways, so you can watch that later. If it gets really bad, you can exit the room and come back in again. That is helpful for people sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to go through in more or less chronological order. Again, there's some of the chronology isn't known exactly, but in chronological order as best as I can do, as best as we know, and we'll talk about each one. Now, before we do that, I just want to make a few kind of general comments about the process of reading these things and interpreting them. Oh yeah, if you're on your phone, definitely switching to a laptop, or switching to a laptop will almost certainly help, or a desktop, a computer. Okay, so I just want to make a few kind of general comments about some themes and but just the sort of process of reading them, because they are very difficult, some more than others, and I'll try to point out as we go along, which ones are kind of more accessible for people newer to this stuff and which ones are more difficult. But they are all very, very difficult texts, to work with. And when I first picked up the Holy Books of Thelema, I flipped through it, and it was just, it may as well have been written, there's words in foreign languages, but it may as well have been completely in a foreign language. I didn't understand any of it at all. And so it's definitely something I think to study and work with alongside other studies, alongside your Qabalistic studies, alongside your own personal magical work, as well as, alongside, Crowley's other writings. All of these things are interrelated, and I think that, it's the kind of stuff that you should, the more exposure and the more often you have exposure to it, certainly the better. But it's the kind of thing that I think is we're not talking about just sort of reading these things a few times and understanding them, but things that can be studied, over the course of an entire lifetime. So, but the question of, if these things are so difficult and so demanding of us, why do it? Why put the energy into it? We know that do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and that there is no law beyond do what thou wilt, right? So they're not going to contain, commandments or anything like that. They're not going to contain, like there's no dogma or anything. So, what is it that these books have to offer us? And I think there's a lot of, that's always kind of an individual question. You have to ultimately answer that for yourself. But there's some things that I'll try to say here. One, of course, is just that these are really the central texts of Thelema. The Book of the Law is sort of first among them and has a very special status. But the others too are really, really core texts for Crowley's own understanding of magical and mystical work, and for the system of the AA. These texts are really important for all of those things. A lot of Crowley's works later, can be understood as him kind of unpacking and working through the consequences and the interpretation of a lot of these things. And so I think we can say that there's no real deep understanding of Thelema that doesn't also include deep study of the Holy Books. Many people have found, and this is certainly the case for me, and really everyone else I know that has invested a lot of time in these, that the books themselves have a special kind of power, that the process of studying these things, we'll talk about memorization maybe a little bit, the process of memorizing these things and studying them deeply, that has a transformative power all itself, that the books seem to do something, beyond what they mean or how we might interpret them. The books themselves seem to act on us, and when we make them part of ourselves and part of our lives, we're changed by that. There's also sort of magical usages of them. As we'll see, some of the books or parts of books have specific correspondences to like specific planets or specific powers, and so we can use these things as part of magical workings, to connect with certain powers. And there's also the sense that because these things are received from some form of higher consciousness, whether we think of this as the higher self of Aleister Crowley, or even something beyond, something divine, that because these things have that origin, in studying these things and immersing ourselves in them, we will naturally attune ourselves to those modes of consciousness and make it more likely that we ourselves could be receivers of this sort of transhuman consciousness. One thing that's important to note about these holy books is these are the holy books of Thelema, but they're not the only holy books. To follow the Thelemic path doesn't mean that you need to consider everything else not a holy book. Certainly there are many other sacred texts that Thelemites sort of work with. I would consider something like the Chaldean Oracles or the Corpus Hermeticum. I mean, those are holy books to me, absolutely. They're not the holy books of Thelema, but they're holy books. And whatever, from any religious tradition, these could all be holy books to you. These are in no way the kind of final holy books. And there's also the idea that people who pursue the magical work to certain levels often receive texts of their own, and so it's entirely possible that there could come a time in your own initiatory work when you receive your own holy books that become even more meaningful and central to your work than these here, and so these could also be a kind of way of stepping towards that and immersing yourself and in that consciousness that you eventually want to become a receiver of in your own right. In addition to just sort of studying and learning Thelema, really taking the time to try to unpack all the Qabalistic symbols and the mythological symbols and the sort of the references to various religious traditions within the holy books will be an excellent education or excellent kind of supplement to an education in Kabbalah and mythology and religious traditions. So there's a lot of additional kind of pedagogical function I think that the Holy Books can have. Trying to understand the Holy Books and doing, studying Kabbalah in order to understand the Holy Books better was definitely one of the ways that I learned Kabbalah. And it makes it, if anyone attended the class series I just did, there's something very on the paths and letters and correspondences. There's something a bit kind of dry and abstract about it. And at the end, I tried to kind of make some suggestions or indications of how these things actually sort of cross over from just being a kind of dry theory to something that actually matters in our own lives and in our magical work and in our initiatory work. And I think the Holy Books do a really good job of doing that as well, that these are, it's Kabbalah and mythology and symbolism actually being used, as powerful expressions and as living sacred texts, not merely as just kind of like, dry tables of correspondences. And then finally, I think there's also the very real function of pleasure, and not just kind of entertainment or enjoyment, but like the ecstatic pleasure, and that reading these things, you can read them, and I think should read them just for the experience itself. Not to try to learn something or to understand something or to gain something out of it, but just for the experience of engaging with these texts. Not all of these texts have meant the same things to me. Some are just sort of interesting, or maybe useful. But the ones that have been really personally meaningful to me and really moving in my study of them, I've often returned to them, just for the experience of returning to them and immersing myself in, the ways that I feel and the ways that I think, when I read those books, and that it's the experience itself that's so valuable. So yeah, and so I guess I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but there's also the question of how to study them and what we do when we study them. Certainly there's going to be a lot of Kabbalistic symbolism and knowing your basic Kabbalistic correspondences, knowing the attributions of the Tree of Life, knowing, kind of some of the basics of like the AA curriculum. These things are all going to be really important for being able to understand the Holy Books. Also, as we'll see, there's a lot of mythological references. Crowley himself was deeply schooled in classical learning, Greek and Latin texts, and in those mythologies. And then there's a lot of mythological references. And so that can be another kind of inroad. And that stuff is pretty easy to look up. If you see the name of a god or someone who appears in like a Greek or Roman, myth, you can look those things up without a lot of difficulty. Also, lots of references to other religious traditions, a lot of biblical references, especially to the King James Bible, which Crowley himself was really deeply steeped in. Also to a lot of Buddhist and Indian texts, and lots of others as well. So yeah, definitely a lot of you can almost see these things as being like in dialogue with other religious traditions, which is something that's really interesting about them, is that they're not, they don't seem to be saying that, all other religious traditions, something like that, are fake or false or something like that, and this is the true revelation. But they actually find themselves in dialogue with other religious traditions in a deep and I think complex way. There's also, we'll see a little bit of this, some philosophical sort of content in these as well, and a kind of basic understanding of philosophy is I think very helpful. It may be psychology too. There's a lot about the nature of reality, the nature of experience, the nature of the mind, the nature of the soul, that we find in all of these. And the more conversant you are with those types of, even though we don't find sort of technical philosophical discussions there, the more you're familiar with those topics, I think the better you'll be able to work with these things. And then I don't want to spend too much time more on this, but I did want to say that one thing that's been extremely helpful for me, and yeah, I think it's been a really important key to understanding these texts, has been to see them sort of in their time, and especially in their relationship to like the avant-garde like art and literature of their time. Crowley himself was deeply connected to a lot of the Parisian and art world, and a lot of the kind of symbolist and decadent movements coming out of Paris in like the 1880s, 1890s. And I think that looking at these things and actually, I think the Holy Books, in a lot of ways, really are really ahead of their time in terms of their like artistic style. I've often thought, in reading some of these, it's reminded me of reading like T.S. Eliot's like The Wasteland, or like kind of James Joyce or something like that, where it's not just that they're kind of difficult symbols, but that the texts themselves seem to be very aware of their own composition and of the process of interpretation, very aware of the language that they're using. And this, to me, really is reminiscent of modern art, where there's a very deep level of self-awareness of the medium of expression, and a lot of kind of questioning and playing with the modes of expression. And again, this sort of self-conscious interrogation of, a lot of, modern poetry is in many ways about poetry and about, what a poem is and what makes a poem, a whole thing. You think of, again, like The Wasteland or something like that. Eliot's using sort of fragments of quotations and different texts, and he sometimes uses kind of disorienting like techniques that make us really very aware of the process of their composition and very aware of like the materiality of the language. And I think the Holy Books do all of this. So yeah, just sort of maybe think of them as art or as modern art and modern literature. That to me has been a very helpful way of thinking about them. And I think it also, the difficulty of these things and sometimes the almost impenetrability of them, rather than simply thinking of these things as like obstacles, thinking, oh, I can't understand them, they're too difficult or something like that. Imagining that the difficulty is simply an obstacle to some clear and precise meaning that lies behind that obstacle. Maybe think about the difficulty as an actual feature of the text themselves. Again, think about how the ways in which the texts actually bring your attention to the process of reading and to the process of interpreting, and maybe also the way that they call into question, sort of what it means for something to be a holy book, what it means for someone to be a prophet, what it means for speech to be divine or inspired, and where exactly this stuff is coming from. How much is Crowley's mind, even if he's not experiencing himself as the author of these things, how much does his own understanding of the English language, how much does his own knowledge, how much do these things influence the text, or not? I think that, again, these aren't things that we need to like answer or figure out. I think that they're things that the texts themselves really call into question. So yeah, I just, as a way of maybe not getting frustrated with them, or as a way of maybe trying to not feel quite so much that, there's some meaning there behind the text and I can't access it, but interpreting all of that, the things that seem to be obstacles, as features of the text themselves. And again, focusing on your own experience. What is it actually like to read these books? Even if you read one of them and don't understand anything and don't think you understand anything, just what was it like? What's it like to not understand something? Or anything at all that you can pick up? Does it remind you of things? There's no limit to the kind of sphere of interpretation. Yeah. And also, I think especially coming out of kind of the 1890s art world and like symbolist art and literature, there was a lot of talk about both visual art as well as poetry and music as less being like about something or conveying a message, but about evoking something. A lot of symbolist art, uses sort of themes from classical mythology, but uses them in a way to try to get at a mystery, to try to express something, or to bring, maybe not express something, but to bring something through that can't be said directly. I think that if the Holy Books have a meaning that could have been expressed simpler, then they're not that valuable. Like if you could reduce it to like simple propositional statements, then someone should just do that, and then we can read those things instead. These books bring through the way that their symbols relate to each other, and the way that different symbols and the way that language and even the sound of language, the actual rhythm and flow of the words, and of kind of repeated vowel sounds or consonants. These things sometimes stir up something in us that we can't express, and that isn't maybe directly contained within like the literal meanings of the words that we're reading. That these can sometimes be vehicles for something else, something mysterious and intangible to come through. Okay, so we've only got about 45 minutes left, so let's jump into it here. Yeah, I'll try to bring up some more of those things as we go along. Okay, so this is the first one that was received in 1907. So what I'll do for each one here is I'll read some of Crowley's own statements about him, and then and then we'll look at some excerpts from them. All right, so this is Liber Liberi, Lo Lapidus Lazuli, Adumbratio, Qabalae, Egyptiorum, Sub Figura 7, being the voluntary emancipation of a certain exempt adept from his adeptship. These are the birth words of a master of the temple. So quite a mouthful of a title there, right? So first, we'll read what Crowley says, and then anything else that we need to sort of break down about that, we can do that. Crowley says, first of all, the nature of this book is sufficiently explained by its title. Its 7 chapters are referred to the 7 planets. He gives the order of them, but we won't worry about that. So this is Liber Liberi. Now this word Liberi, so this is like the book of Liber. Now Liber is the name of a Roman god. It's an interesting word. Now Liber, of course, the first Liber we see here is the Latin word for book. But Liber also has a few other meanings as well. It's the name of a god. It's also a word meaning free, like freedom or liberty. And it's also related, I think it's form or the Latin verb libare, which means, I think literally to sprinkle or to pour, but like to give libations. Specifically, and I think here we're especially talking about libations of wine. So the god Liber, you can look into his mythology. He's connected to Dionysus and to Bacchus. He's a god of wine and of viticulture. Also a god of fertility and a god of freedom as well. So this is like the book of Liber. A god of wine, a god of freedom, and also Dionysus and Bacchus, god of ecstasy, right? So it's the book of Liber, or the VEL, that's well, means or, and so it's like an alternative title. So it's the book of Liber, or the book of Lapis Lazuli, right? Lapis Lazuli is a stone that appears in a lot of Thelemic holy books, the image of Lapis Lazuli. It's a blue stone, a dark blue stone, with it's not actually gold, but what looks like bits of gold sort of scattered throughout it. Often that image is often connected to Nuit, to the idea of the night sky, right? The starry, stars against the night sky. Now, adumbratio, Qabalae Egyptiorum. Adumbratio means something like sketch or outline, so like a sketch or outline of Egyptian Kabbalah. Under the figure or under the number 7. Now the 7 here refers both to the 7 chapters as well as the 7 planets, and probably other meanings as well that we can interpret. Let's see, what else does Crowley say here? He says, gives in magical language an account of the initiation of a master of the temple. This is the only parallel for beauty of ecstasy to Liber 65. I think that's good for Crowley's comments there. So I'm just going to show you 2 excerpts here, just to give you a taste of it, and I'll maybe say a few things about how you can go about reading this. All right, so these 7 chapters here. There's also a prologue as well. The prologue is very different than the rest of the text. So I'll just show you, this is an excerpt. This is the first 16 verses of chapter 1. I'll just read it, and then we can talk about it a little bit. My God, how I love thee. With the vehement appetite of a beast, I hunt thee through the universe. Thou art standing, as it were, upon a pinnacle at the edge of some fortified city. I am a white bird and perch upon thee. Thou art my lover. I see thee as a nymph with her white limbs stretching by the spring. She lies upon the moss. There is none other but she. Art thou not Pan? I am he. Speak not, O my God. Let the work be accomplished in silence. Let my cry of pain be crystallized into a little white fawn to run away into the forest. Thou art a centaur, O my God, from the violet blossoms that crown thee to the hoofs of the horse. Thou art harder than tempered steel. There is no diamond beside thee. Did I not yield this body and soul? I woo thee with a dagger drawn across my throat. Let the spout of blood quench thy blood thirst, O my God. Thou art a little white rabbit in the barrow night. I am greater than the fox and the hole. Give me thy kisses, O Lord God. So just a few things here. Obviously, we can see the presence of a lot of mythological imagery here. The mention of Pan, of course, and centaurs, and possibly other references as well that we could work out. Now, in its form, this book it's there's not a lot of necessarily coherent scenes. It's very it really flows a lot between who's the speaker and what the scene is. It's very sort of dynamic and flowing. But there's a kind of the poetry, I think, and music of the language kind of takes over what we might think what was sort of lacking in like coherent narrative. In its style, it really reminds me of the Song of Songs, from the Old Testament, especially the King James version. If you haven't read the Song of Songs, it's kind of a very surprising thing. If you're not that familiar with the Bible, it's a surprising thing to be in there. It's quite erotic in its tone, in sensual, and it really reminds me a lot of the text of Liber 7. So it's an interesting thing to read them side by side. But compared to the Song of Songs, this is almost a work of surrealism, right? I mean, we have these sort of constantly shifting metaphors, and images are coming together in ways that are very kind of unexpected and surprising. This is another way, surrealism isn't developed until a few decades, after this book is written. So this is another way that I think is really ahead of its time, just in terms of the art and literature. So very sensual, very devotional, and erotic, and also kind of there's a really shifting. There's passages of it that are definitely homoerotic. There's a kind of gender kind of fluidity between whether the speaker is male or female, and whether the god being adored is male or female. So there's something very kind of fluid and expansive in the nature of its eroticism. Which I think is also a very compelling feature here. Sometimes very surprising images here too. Like I was saying, up until like line 11 there, things had been very kind of sensual and sweet, and then all of a sudden we have "I woo thee with a dagger drawn across my throat." Right? We've suddenly really switched rapidly in these modes, and now we get a kind of violent and gory sort of image. And so those moments of surprise and of being like, whoa, where did that come from? Those are important things to pay attention to, and I think important parts of it, more than just what the individual meaning of those things might be, but also the way that the flow is interrupted sometimes, and the way that images might surprise us. All right, I'll give you another excerpt here. This is from chapter 4. I'm spending a little more time on this one because, this one as well as the next one we'll see, Liber 65. These are two of the most important of the holy books, the most central. All right, so here's the first 15 verses of chapter 4. The last one we saw here, the chapter 1, that chapter is attributed to the planet Mars. In this chapter here, chapter 4 is attributed to the sun, and we'll definitely see some solar imagery here. All right. I am like a maiden bathing in a clear pool of fresh water. Oh my God, I see thee dark and desirable, rising through the water as a golden smoke. Thou art altogether golden, the hair and the eyebrows and the brilliant face, even into the fingertips and toe tips. Thou art one rosy dream of gold. Deep into thine eyes that are golden, my soul leaps, like an archangel menacing the sun. My sword passes through thee. Crystalline moons ooze out of thy beautiful body that is hidden behind the oval of thine eyes. Deeper, ever deeper, I fall, even as the whole universe falls down the abyss of years. For eternity calls, the overworld calls, the world of the word is awaiting us. Be done with speech, O God. Fasten the fangs of the hound eternity in this my throat. I am like a wounded bird flapping in circles. Who knows where I shall fall? O blessed one, O God, O my devourer, let me fall down, fall away, afar, alone. Let me fall. Nor is there any rest, sweetheart, save in the cradle of royal Bacchus, the thigh of the most holy one. There rest under the canopy of night. All right, so I'll say a few things here. There's some commentary from Crowley on Liber 7. It was just sort of marginalia in some of his own, in one of his own copies. You can find those in the, this is the commentaries on the Holy Books. It's Equinox, Volume 4, Number 1. This is kind of an expensive out-of-print text, but it does have some commentaries that are difficult to find elsewhere. So in that commentary on verse 1 here, Crowley interprets the maiden bathing in the pool as a reference to Malka, like the bride or the Shekinah, attributed to Malkuth on the Tree of Life. And then in the few verses that follow after that, the golden god that rises up out of the waters, this is like Tefereth, or like the vow of Tetragrammaton. This is the holy guardian angel. So a reference, the relationship between kind of the individual person and the holy guardian angel. Now, yeah, I find some of this imagery very striking here again. And again, kind of really surrealist in a way, right? We have first a golden smoke rising through the water. And then now we have a figure being described as gold, the hair and the eyebrows and the face, all are a rosy dream of gold. So this sort of shift from smoke rising through the water to now the image of a figure. And then verse 4 there, this very striking image, deep into thine eyes that are golden, my soul leaps, right? A very sort of devotional, kind of beautiful, loving image. But then that's said to be like an archangel menacing the sun. I find that a very striking image. Now, obviously, Kabbalistically, like the sun, the gold there is attributed to Tefereth and to the sun, and now we have the image of an archangel menacing the sun. So this is all very solar imagery, and that's very appropriate to the Holy Guardian Angel. The Holy Guardian Angel is very often connected to solar imagery. And then in line 5, now we have a switch, and my sword passes through and through thee. Crystalline moons ooze out of thy beautiful body. Quite an image, crystalline moons oozing out of a body. And we've switched from solar to lunar as well there. And this image of the body being hidden behind the oval of thine eyes, that again is a very strange and striking image, I find. How could someone's body be hidden behind their eyes, right? And then, before we move on, let's see, just one more. For verse 14 there, this line, save in the cradle of royal Bacchus, the thigh of the most holy one. Here we have another mythological reference. In the birth of Dionysus, his mother, Semele, while she's pregnant with him, she's basically tricked by Hera into getting Zeus, her lover, Dionysus' father, to reveal himself in his full divine glory, which mortals can't survive, and so she perishes from this. But Zeus takes the young Dionysus and sews him into his thigh. Right, so sort of knowing some of that basic, Greco-Roman mythology is very helpful in understanding this. Okay, so now our other of our two kind of most important holy books after the Book of the Law. Now we've got the other one here, Liber 65. So Liber 65, Liber Cordis Cincti Serpenti, subfigura Adonai. Adonai, the Hebrew word there at the bottom, it literally means Lord, and especially in the Thelemic tradition, it's used as a name to refer to the Holy Guardian Angel. If you enumerate that word, those 4 letters, it sums to 65. there's some other interesting meanings of 65, and there's some other really interesting Kabbalah that you can do with the name Adonai. But that's obviously our basic reference here is to Adonai, and then the Holy Guardian Angel. And then Cordis Cincti Serpenti is the heart girt with the serpent, which is an image originally coming out of the Greek magical papyri, and then forming gets used in the preliminary invocation of the Goetia that Mathers and Crowley put together, and then eventually becomes part of Liber Samec. And so this is just a line found there that I am the heart girt with the serpent is my name. But this image of a heart girt with the serpent becomes really important in the Thelemic tradition. And in this book especially really develops that image. So I'll give you kind of a fairly long excerpt from chapter 1. Actually, it's going to be the first 30-something verses there. And then, you can investigate the rest of it on your own. But I think it does a nice job of introducing some of the major themes that we see throughout Liber 65. Before that, I'll read you a few of Crowley's comments on this book. He says, it is an account of the relations of the aspirant with his holy guardian angel. It's given to probationers of the AA who memorize a chapter of it. Neophytes of the AA memorize a chapter of Liber 7 that we just saw. And the process of memorizing these books definitely makes them a part of you in a way that I think no other form of study can. They literally come to reside inside of you. And in the course of memorizing it, you'll spend an enormous amount of time with the texts, and so your level of understanding, there's no equal to the work of memorization. It's also great training in mental powers as well. The more you do memorization, the easier and easier it gets. Let's see, what else does he say? He says this magical treatise describes particularly the relation of the aspirant with his higher self. It is, alike in conception and execution, a masterpiece of exaltation of thought carved in pure beauty. There are 5 chapters here in Liber 65, and they correspond with the 5 elements in the order of earth, air, water, fire, and spirit. Each chapter has exactly 65 verses, and of course it's Liber 65. Let's see. It shows. Let's see. Crowley says it shows each element in the light of its relation between the Adeptus Minor and his holy guardian angel. So the Adeptus Minor is one who is either just about to achieve knowledge and conversation, or has just done so. That's the distinction between the Adeptus Minor without and the Adeptus Minor within. Is whether you're working on, you're just on the threshold of knowledge and conversation, or just after knowledge and conversation. Okay. So we'll read. I skipped the first verse is a kind of long introductory verse. It's actually in verse, rhymed meter. But then we really get into the main body of the text here with verse 2. So we're just going to start there. And I'll make a few comments actually as we go along. I think will be a little more helpful. So Adonai spake unto V, saying, there must ever be division in the word. So now we have a dialogue is being set up. So Adonai, as we said, is a name for the holy guardian angel. Now V is a very interesting and also really complex figure. The V is an abbreviation of Vi Veri Universum Vivis Vici, which means something like, while living, I have conquered the universe. Or by my strength while living, I have conquered the universe, something like that. This is Crowley's motto as a master of the temple. And so we could think that VVVVV is Crowley himself, but his highest self. But as we'll see in this text, there is actually kind of a distinction made between the figure of VVVV and Aleister Crowley, the man. So whether or not this is Crowley or a part of Crowley or is a separate entity is definitely something that is left ambiguous and is something I think that the text itself actually kind of questions or raises as questions, is what the relationship between these different figures are. And so a lot of Liber 65 is this dialogue between VVVVV and Adonai. And in many of these cases, Adonai is sort of instructing or teaching VVVVV. All right, so there must ever be division in the word. For the colors are many, but the light is one. Therefore thou writest that which is of mother of emerald, and of lapis lazuli, and of turquoise, and of alexandrite. Another writeth the words of topaz, and of deep amethyst, and of gray sapphire, and of a deep sapphire with a tinge as of blood. Therefore do ye fret yourselves because of this. Be not contented with the image. I, who am the image of an image, say this. Debate not of the image, saying beyond, beyond. One mounteth unto the crown by the moon, and by the sun, and by the arrow, and by the foundation, and by the dark home of the stars from the black earth. Not otherwise may ye reach unto the smooth point. So we've got some Kabbalistic symbolism coming in here in these last few verses. So when mounted unto the crown, of course, is Kether, the highest sephira on the tree of life. So when mounted unto the crown by the moon, and by the sun, by the arrow, by the foundation, and by the dark home of the stars from the black earth. And so this series of images describes the middle pillar on the tree of life from the top down. So starting from Kether, the path directly below Kether, connecting it to Tefereth, is the path of Gimel, which is attributed to the moon. Now Tefereth is the sphere of the sun. Below Tefereth, the path descending vertically downward is the path of Samek, which is attributed to Sagittarius, which is the archer or the arrow. Foundation is the meaning of Yesod, which is the sephira on the middle pillar directly below Tefereth. And then finally, by the dark home of the stars from the black earth. Now, the black earth is obviously Malkuth, the lowest sephira on the tree. And so while we might not immediately think of the path of Tav when we read the dark home of the stars, it's obvious from the context that we're talking about the path of Tav. We can think about the universe in the tarot. Not otherwise may ye reach unto the smooth point. The smooth point is a title of Kether. So a kind of example of the way that Kabbalistic symbolism appears here. Let's see, there's a question here. See, Alan says, I read a manuscript where Crowley wrote in the margin, ask VVVVV about this, as if he was something or someone else. Yeah, Crowley certainly talks that way at times. Yeah, absolutely. Though at other times, he somewhat identifies himself with it. Yeah. So that's a very complex topic. I think it's also certainly with a lot of other things that Crowley's own understanding of that thing may have shifted over time, or it may be that he understood that the truth of it is something entirely beyond dualistic language, and so that he could express it one way or another way, depending on the context, or what he needed, or maybe how connected he was to his higher self. Maybe when he made that note or something like that, he was feeling very much just the mundane, ego or something like that, and thinking, I'll ask, that sort of higher initiated part of myself when I'm next in deep contact with it, or maybe he really was thinking about it as a separate entity. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, let's just sort of continue on here. I've got Crowley's commentary here on Liber 65. Actually, I'll pause here for a moment here to talk about the commentary. Again, you can find it in this book, the commentaries on the Holy Books. But this commentary in particular is the most, other than some of the comments in the Book of the Law, his commentary on Liber 65 is the most extensive and the most complete. And also, I think the most important, this commentary on Liber 65 is incredibly important and incredibly useful. And so, like I said, this commentaries on the Holy Book is out of print. I've seen it going for about $150 or so, which is, it's worth it, if you can afford that and want to make the investment. But you can also find all of this commentary on in the Continuum, the publication that was done by Sora Merrill and the College of Thelema. They published the entire commentary to Liber 65. Now, the College of Thelema owns the rights to in the Continuum, but they've made it all publicly available. So at least the last time I checked, you could get all of the issues of In the Continuum from their website. I also have PDF copies of all of them. So if you can't find them for some reason, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to share them with people. But yeah, you can get all these commentaries for nothing. Yeah, which is another amazing thing that Sora Merrill did, was helping to put these commentaries out into the world. And I believe those would have been published before this book was published. So for a while, that would have been the only way that people had access to them. Let's see. So Crowley comments on verses 2. I'll read verse 11 here too, I guess. Nor is it fitting for the cobbler to prate of the royal matter. O cobbler, mend me this shoe that I may walk. O king, if I be thy son, let us speak of the embassy to the king thy brother. And then Crowley comments on that whole section, everything we've read here. And he says, the angel says, each man sees nature in his own particular way. What he sees is only an image. All images must be ignored. The adept must aspire single-heartedly to the smooth point. This matter cannot be discussed in common language. The king must speak of kingly things in a kingly way. So that's just kind of a taste of the way that Crowley is doing this commentary. He doesn't explain absolutely everything, but yeah, his commentary is extremely useful. All right, so let's just continue on here. We're running out of time. Yeah, all right, so with verse 12 here, and then I'm going to continue on to the next screen. Then there was silence. Speech had done with us a while. There is a light so strenuous that it is not perceived as light. Wolfsbane is not so sharp as steel, yet it pierceth the body more subtly. Even as evil kisses corrupt the blood, so do my words devour the spirit of man. I breathe, and there is infinite dis-ease in the spirit. As an acid eats into steel, as a cancer that utterly corrupts the body, so am I unto the spirit of man. I shall not rest until I have dissolved it all. So also the light that is absorbed. One absorbs little and is called white and glistening. One absorbs all and is called black. Therefore, O my darling, art thou black. I'll just pause for a second here. We see a few things here. First of all, there's a kind of almost a sort of reversal or a kind of striking opposite of what we might expect in this sort of devotional sort of language about the holy guardian angel, where the process of initiation is described, as a process of destruction and of poisoning and of acid, that eats away. When Crowley talks about, let's see, a few of his comments here. He says, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel gives a new and higher form of energy which destroys the grosser types of existence. So even we might find, again, this is another kind of thing that we'll see in a lot of the holy books, that there's sometimes images that seem very horrific or even shocking or disturbing in ways. And I think, one of the ways we can approach these things is by, again, seeing a dramatization of some of the difficulties and the challenges in the initiatory path, but also of breaking up some of our conventional ideas and conventional ideas of what's sort of good and desirable and what's bad and to be rejected. This is definitely going beyond all of this stuff and making us rethink, a lot of the images and ways that we tend to think about spirituality and spiritual progress. There's also some of the idea of poison here is also some of the serpent imagery. Poison itself is a very interesting theme that runs all throughout Liber 65 and shows up in some of the other holy books as well. Again, there's this idea of the mundane life or the mundane false conceptions being destroyed by spiritual knowledge and spiritual ecstasy, and certainly the poison has that significance. I also think in a lot of kind of 19th century, French poetry and things like that. Poison is often also used as a word to talk about intoxication, whether by alcohol or by drugs. So we might also think of being poisoned, like being intoxicated, and being drunk, but not on literal, like drugs or alcohol, but on the spirit, on the knowledge and conversation, on our relationship to these things, or to our experience of ecstasy. The images of, in many other religious traditions have also used images of intoxication to express these images. And it also ties into some of the serpent imagery. Let's see, now because we're running out of time, I'm just going to skip ahead here a little bit. So I'll just pick it up here with verse 25. Thou wast long seeking me. Thou didst run forward so fast that I was unable to come up with thee. O thou darling fool, what bitterness thou didst crown thy days withal. Now I am with thee. I will never leave thy being. This is another theme that comes up a few times in Liber 65 about how Crowley in particular, and maybe all of us in our work, by our eagerness to sort of go out and find spiritual truth and seek for the holy guardian angel, we miss the fact that it's been with us all along. And yet, as this book really develops, that's not simply an error, but a necessary part of the process. There's a line later on in Liber 65, to await thee is the end and not the beginning. So the idea that we sort of have to make these errors of sort of going out and searching all over the place for these things, and that's the only way that we can eventually realize that what we were searching for was with us all along. And so, even though the Crowley sort of being, or whatever VVV here is being kind of admonished as a fool, there's something tender and kind of loving about that. About that spiritual source that's saying, you've been searching around like a fool, and I was here, within you and beyond you, this whole time. Now I am with thee. I will never leave thy being, for I am the soft, sinuous one entwined about thee, heart of gold. So again, some of this imagery of the serpent, the holy guardian angel as the serpent, and the adept as the heart. And the serpent winding about the heart and sort of clenching the heart is like the adept's knowledge and conversation, this deep, intimate relationship between the adept and the angel. My head is jeweled with 12 stars. My body is white as milk at the stars. It is bright with the blue of the abyss of stars invisible. I have found that which could not be found. I have found a vessel of quicksilver. Thou shalt instruct thy servant in his ways. Thou shalt speak often with him. The scribe looketh upwards and crieth, Amen. Thou hast spoken it, Lord God. So now we see the introduction of the scribe, the man, Aleister Crowley, appearing here. So Adonai, in verse 30 here, we can interpret this as the Adonai is saying to VVVV to instruct his servant, who is like the person, the concrete individual, Aleister Crowley, to speak often with him and to instruct him in his ways. And then the scribe, so Crowley himself now, Crowley experienced himself as perfectly passive during this experience, right? He's just writing with no real conscious understanding of what it is that he's writing. But he himself and the process of his reception of the book actually gets put into the book itself, if that makes sense, right? So the scribe kind of Aleister Crowley looks upwards and cries, Amen, thou hast spoken it, Lord God. So the scribe kind of enters into the text itself. He's not simply like a prophet who's just passively his experience of it is of just passively receiving this text, but the book itself includes the process of the reception of the text as part of the text itself, which I find really sort of fascinating and really interesting. And that's something that plays out throughout the course of this book. And you'll see kind of interesting and sometimes even slightly humorous ways that the scribe, either kind of gets involved or even sometimes interferes with Adonai and VVVVV having their discussion, their relationship. So that just something to sort of be on the lookout as you go through. So there's a lot in this book. A lot of different stuff. You'll see that the theme of the heart and the serpent, the theme of kind of the relationship between these different parts of the individual of Crowley and of VVV and then the Holy Guardian Angel, and those relationships is definitely a big part of the book. And then also there's some just very accessible and really useful and even practical spiritual advice, about the process of seeking and awaiting. And there's a lot of stuff about patience and patient work and sort of awaiting the day when the Holy Guardian Angel will reveal itself. Portions of it are much more accessible than others. Actually, as they go along, the chapters get sort of more and more difficult until chapter 4 is quite difficult. But then chapter 5 kind of goes back to being accessible again. So just something to pay attention to. What parts do you feel like you understand and you get something from, and what parts are you, you're not getting stuff from. And that's something that you can really deepen with over time. With each reading and each time you study it, you can gain more and more. All right. Yeah, we're definitely going to run over. So apologies. If anybody needs to take off in 10 minutes from now, no hurt feelings or anything like that. But I'm going to try to. I'll try to speed up. But we will definitely go a little over 7:30 here. All right. So the next one received here again in 1907 is Liber Stellae Rubeae. That means the Book of the Ruby Star. A secret ritual of a pep. The heart of Iao Oae, delivered unto VVVVV for his use in a certain matter of Liber Legis, and written down under the figure 66. So a pep here, say a couple of things. A pep is a name, one of the names of the serpent destroyer. Another name is Apophis, who's equated with the Greek typhon. Apep is from Egyptian mythology. So again, we have some of this idea of like the serpent again, but the serpent kind of paradoxically, the holy guardian angel as the serpent, who is paradoxically the destroyer. Right, in Egyptian mythology, Apep is almost entirely a negative figure. So there's a kind of reversal or an inversion of an earlier mythology to express something new. Yeah, so let's see. The heart of Iao Oae. Now, Iao, most of you are probably familiar with that as a divine name. Now, we also have the reverse of that divine name, Oae, which Crowley at least understands, Iao to be like a magical formula, a formula of creation, and then Oae to be like a mystical formula. Magic and mysticism are often taken to be kind of complementary opposites, where magic is moving from like the higher source down into manifestation, the process of creating something. Mysticism is like the reversal of the process of creation, of going from the created world, back, and sort of stepping backwards to its divine source. Yeah, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about this one here. The number 66 is the sum of the numbers from 1 through 11. And 11, especially in Crowley's work and in Thelema, is the number of magic. So definitely the idea of sort of some magical secrets being revealed here. This is a tricky text, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not going to sort of dive into it. You really have to see the whole thing together. It just broken out pieces of it can be kind of, I think, probably more confusing and misleading. So yeah, we're not going to look at specifics there. There's definitely some sexual magic instruction going on, though. Just as a kind of general comment about the presence of sexual imagery or of sex magic instruction, I've sometimes seen one of my pet peeves about people sort of doing too easy kind of interpretations of these things is that if they can find sexual imagery or what seems to be instruction in sex magic, that ends up being like the end of their interpretation. They go, oh, I figured it out. It was a symbol for a penis, all done or something like that. And you're like, no. Like you've understood the symbols a little bit deeper, but that's not the end. Sort of getting that there's something sexual happening or that there's there's some kind of a sex magic ritual being implied is not the end of interpretation. In a lot of like kind of psychoanalysis and psychological, early kind of 20th century psychological literature, you often have kind of ideas about things that don't seem to be sexual being interpreted as like sexual, and that sexuality playing a very deep sort of hidden role, and things like sexual repression and things like that playing very, very important roles in individuals' lives and even in civilization. But that's never really like the end of interpretation, right? If it becomes the case that like sort of no matter what, in a kind of exaggerated way, no matter what you're doing, like you're really thinking about sex, and no matter what you're trying to do, you're just trying to sort of get sex or something like that, then the question isn't like, oh, okay, that's sort of the answer. Then the real deep question becomes, but what is sex? If everything means sex, what does sex mean, right? And so I think that's even more true in these holy books, that and in all kind of anything where there's a sex magic interpretation, that we should never stop there, and we should ask questions about what those things mean. Yeah. Right, and so it's not just that like magic is being interpreted in like a sexual way, but that sexuality has been interpreted in a magical and mystical way. It's not simply like a reduction of one thing to something else. Anyways, that's way more time than I wanted to spend on that book. All right, so next one here, another one from 1907. We have Liber Portalucus. Portalucus means the gate of light, which is a title for Malkuth, and it's under the figure 10, which is the number of the Sephira Malkuth. This one is quite accessible. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because I think you can read it, and there's things to meditate on and to think about. But they're kind of philosophical ideas, and it's not a deeply impenetrable text. I'll just read like the first 2 verses here. I behold a small dark orb, wheeling in an abyss of infinite space. It is minute among a myriad vast ones, dark among a myriad bright ones. The idea this is like the planet Earth that we're seeing here. I who comprehend in myself all the vast and the minute, all the bright and the dark, have mitigated the brilliance of mine unutterable splendor, sending forth V as a ray of my light, as a messenger under that small dark orb. And then the book essentially takes up the message of V and the message that he brings to humanity, who of course don't understand it. But again, I think a lot of this is pretty accessible. I just want to highlight one verse here that I think is really interesting, and that's verse 19. And this is part of like the message of V. To you who yet wander in the court of the profane, we cannot yet reveal all, but you will easily understand that the religions of the world are but symbols and veils of the absolute truth. So also are the philosophies. To the adept, seeing all these things from above, there seems nothing to choose between Buddha and Mohammed, between atheism and theism. So I think the first part of that, the idea that all the religions of the world are but sort of different expressions of one eternal truth, right? That is kind of universalism to it. I think that's a pretty familiar idea to most people. Maybe in 1907 that was more radical, but in this day and age, I think it's a lot of people would probably agree with that. But the second part there, that all the philosophies are the same, right? So if there's nothing to choose between Buddha and Mohammed, you're like, okay, Buddhism and Islam are just sort of 2 different ways of expressing spiritual truths. Seems fine, right? But there's nothing to choose between theism and atheism. That is a much more striking expression, and one that I think is worth meditation. That to the adept, there's not even a difference between there being a God and there being no God. So how the adept is entirely beyond that question. So although that's a fairly accessible idea, there's a lot there, and I think it's really worth meditation. And if you get some insight into how that might be, I think that'll not only really increase your own understanding, but really, I think, help to open up some of Crowley's perspective. That Crowley can sometimes, when he's being extremely skeptical or even sort of blasphemous, there's always the sense of being beyond dualities, right? Never of like reducing anything or of getting rid of anything, but always of going beyond and going through and transcending. Okay, so let's just move on here. So now we've got Liber Tav, Qabalae Trium Literarum, subfigure of 400. So this is like the letter Tav, which has a value of 400. And the Latin there means something like the Kabbalah of letter triads or trinities of letters, which will make a lot of sense when you see it. So this is it. This is the entire text right here, this image. So we've got the big figure that you see over the top. That's a kind of stylized version of the letter Tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And then we've got the other 21 letters arranged in 3 rows of 7 in alphabetical order, from right to left and from top to bottom. Now what's happening here is that the vertical columns of the 3 letters are then being interpreted. So each one of those vertical columns of 3 is like one of the triads. And then the text, which is written sideways below them, is like an interpretation or an unpacking of those 3 letters. So I'll just give you one example. Let's see, which is a fairly simple one. The second one there, so second column from the right, that's Beth, and then Teth, and then Ayin. And we see the ultimate illusion, the illusion of force, the illusion of matter. So these sort of go in order from top down. So Beth is the ultimate illusion. And we can think of like the Magus of the tarot, right? Who, especially in Crowley's interpretations, the Magus is like the creator of the world in the sense of like the creator of duality, which is ultimately an illusion because all things are one and not separate. So the Magus is the creator of the illusion of separation. So that's the ultimate illusion. Then we have Teth, which is the illusion of force. Now Teth Crowley calls it lust, and its classical name is strength. Right, and so strength, force, and actually in French, the strength card is la force in like the Tarot de Marseille. And then Ayin is the illusion of matter. And we can think of Ayin is attributed to the devil in the tarot, and that's very much a kind of esoteric interpretation of what the devil means. That the devil is the illusion of matter. So you can see that the English text there is a kind of gloss or an interpretation of that triad of 3 letters. And then you can, on your own, you can look at the other ones and try to work out how that English interprets those letters. You can also use this as a really nice pattern for meditation. If you lay out your tarot trumps, like the Thoth tarot trumps, in this pattern. Now you can just sort of put the universe, corresponding to Tav. You can just sort of put it at the top or the bottom or something like that. Obviously, you can't make it really big and surround the others, but lay out the other 21 in these 3 rows of 7, and then sort of meditate on that pattern, and especially on the vertical groups of 3 is a really nice meditation exercise. All right, next one here is Liber A'ash. So let's see, Liber A'ash or Hamus Hermeticus, that's the Hermetic fishhook, subfigure at 90. So 90, of course, is the value of the letter A'ash. And as we saw, if anyone who just attended my class, last class series knows, at least in our system, A'ash is said to be the fishhook, right? That's the significance of that letter in our system. So this is the Hermetic fishhook. And the idea of, I think, at least as I understand it here, the fishhook image is of uplifting, and of something being lifted up. This again is a pretty accessible one. I think you could enter into it without, too much difficulty. The main figure here is Rahur Kuit, the Lord of the Aeon, and sort of his message and what he offers us, and what some of the experience of his initiation is like. A lot of really interesting stuff to meditate on, but pretty accessible. I'll just give you one brief sample here. This is verses 28 to 31. I love you. I would sprinkle you with the divine dew of immortality. This immortality is no vain hope beyond the grave. I offer you the certain consciousness of bliss. I offer it at once, on earth, before an hour hath struck upon the bell. You shall be with me in the abodes that are beyond decay. Also I give you power earthly and joy earthly, wealth and health and length of days. Adoration and love shall cling to your feet and twine around your heart. Only your mouths shall drink of a delicious wine, the wine of Iacchus. They shall reach ever to the heavenly kiss of the beautiful God. So again, this is a pretty accessible one, and a shorter one too. This is about like four pages long, 3.5 pages. So one of the shorter ones. Liber 65 and Liber 7 are definitely the longest of the ones that we looked at today. Only the Book of the Law is of similar length. All right, next we have Liber Trigrammaton, subfigure at 27, being the book of the trigrams of the mutations of the Tao with the yin and the yang. So Trigrammaton means something like 3-letter. Like the Tetragrammaton is the 4-lettered name. This is like the 3-lettered name. And under the figure 27. So what we're going to have here is the trigrams, like from the I Ching. Normally there are 8 trigrams because there's 2 types of lines. There's the yin lines and yang lines. And so 3 lines with 2 choices for each is 2 times 2 times 2, that's 8. But here we are introducing a 3rd symbol, and we get 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. So it goes through 27 permutations of the solid line is for yang, the broken line is for yin, and then the point or dot here is like neither. It's the non-existence that precedes the separation into yin and yang. So what happens, the 27 permutations get listed out, starting with all nothing, all the dot, the neither line, and then adding in yin and yang, and then eventually going through all the permutations. And so you can see that it's interpreted as a kind of creation story. So we see, 3 of the not or neither lines is, here is nothing under its 3 forms. It is not, yet informeth all things. And then now in the next figure, we introduce a single yang line, and we get, now cometh the glory of the single one as an imperfection and stain. And then it just sort of goes on. I'll show you, these aren't the next 4 after the 4 you just saw, these are a little bit later, but you can see eventually you go through all the permutations involving the neither, and then you get into the more conventional trigrams of the I Ching. And then each one is being given an interpretation. Now, so these interpretations sometimes are closer or further away from the actual kind of conventional I Ching interpretations. Like the second one you see there, the 3 yang lines, the verse for that one is, then only was heaven established to bear sway, for only in the lowest corruption is form manifest. This trigram in the I Ching is called heaven. So sometimes sticking closer to the I Ching stuff, sometimes diverging more. But that's the basic idea here, is that the permutations are interpreted as a kind of story of creation. All right, so we're now in the text from 1911 here. So I give the text from 19, since I don't know what order they were received in, we're just going to go in alphabetical order. Liber B, well, Mage, subfigura 1. The symbolism here is all of the Magus in the tarot, right? Liber B, that's like the letter Beth, which is attributed to the Magus of the tarot, which is the Atu number 1. Now this most especially concerns the grade of Magus, which is an extremely high grade, beyond even the Magister of the Temple. But in its basic symbolism, it is fairly accessible. We're sort of running out of time here, so I'm not going to read anything from it. But it's pretty approachable, even though I think its deepest mysteries are of something extremely high. But if you just sort of go into it with really the idea, you could even like have the Magus from the Thoth Tarot with you, and really look at the text kind of side by side with that Tarot too. I think you can work out a lot of, at least the basic ideas and basic symbolism going on. All right, next we have Liber Heth, well, Wallam Abiegni, subfigura 156. So Heth, of course, is one of the letters of the Tarot, or one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and it corresponds with the Tarot Atu of the Chariot. Now this text very definitely relates to some of the stuff from the Vision and the Voice, especially the visions of the 12th and 2nd Aether that correspond with, or that really deal with the goddess Babylon and the revelation of her and some of her mysteries to Crowley. And so in those revelations, the chariot, the card, from the tarot, the charioteer there becomes like the Babylon's cupbearer. And so that's being used here again. Though, of course, Heth spelled in full is 418, which connects to the word abrahadabra. So there's a lot of very deep stuff going on as well here. But the basic ideas of the cupbearer of Babylon. Now the Wallam Abiegni, or the Wall of Abiegnis. Abiegnis is the sacred mountain in the Rosicrucian tradition, which is something you can look into. And then it's under the figure 156. Now the number 156 is the value of Babylon and not directly connected to the letter Heth. So again, this I think really needs to be read in conjunction with the Vision and the Voice, especially the visions of the 12th and 2nd Aether. Yeah, let's just move on here. I was going to get, if we have time, maybe, or we're already over time, so never mind. Yeah, this is another one I think that's pretty approachable. Although it's also very difficult and challenging in a different way, not so much obscure. It really mixes very, very beautiful and inspiring imagery with some really kind of terrible and shocking and even maybe kind of almost like morally repugnant imagery. I think it was Jim Eshelman once I heard describe the book as terrible and beautiful, or beautiful and terrible. And that's a really good description of it, I think, that sort of mixing images of horror and sort of depravity with images of the highest spirituality. Also, it should be read in conjunction with the Book of Revelation, especially chapters 17 and 18 of Revelation. Right, the goddess Babylon is a kind of, well, I don't know exactly how to put it, but her first appearance would be like in the Book of Revelation, where she appears as, you know, the whore of Babylon, an entirely negative figure. But then in the Thelemic tradition, that is again sort of inverted and really completely flipped on its head, where she becomes a symbol of the highest, you know, spirituality, and of sort of a complete non-duality, where the kind of uncleanliness of her, and even the idea of like the whore as one who accepts all, this becomes like an image of non-duality, of not making distinctions and of comprehending everything. Crowley sometimes talks about her as like a feminine version of Pan, you know, something that symbolizes everything and comprehends everything. Yeah, so I think that helps understand why some of these kind of images of horror or of disgust come in here, because overcoming those things is an important part of high initiatory work, you know, of making distinctions between things and of our own, you know, ego's tendency to seek after certain things and to reject other things. So we can read all of those themes here. So yeah, read it alongside the vision and the voice, and especially chapters 17 and 18 of the Book of Revelation. All right, then we have Libra Archanarum. You know, I'm not even, just for time's sake, I'm not going to get into glossing all of the sort of strange Latin and even bits of Greek here. This is a weird text. Parts of it were received in 1907 and parts in 1911. It consists of essentially 4 different things. 2 of them are on the screen here. These sort of sigils of the spiritual powers of the 22 letters. On the left, you're seeing the kind of the normal or sort of standard expression of those things. And on the right, you're seeing their cliphothic expression, their kind of dark shadow or unbalanced side. Then you also have 22 verses that relate to the 22 letters. Excuse me. And then a list of 22 names of the spirits connected with these powers. So not a lot of indication of how these things are to be used, though there's lots of magicians out there that have done experimentation with them. Although, you know, I'd caution some skepticism when looking at how other people interpret these things and how other people use them. A lot of kind of Typhonian, kind of people coming through like Kenneth Grant and stuff like that have gotten really into these images. And I definitely disagree with a lot of their, or some of their understandings of Thelemic things. So interesting stuff to look at. Yeah. But it's yeah, and things that could be, you know, the names and sigils could be incorporated into personal workings. Though definitely a difficult text to you know, it's something that, yeah, could be sort of used, but it's not really like a text or a holy book to be read in the normal way. All right, then we have Liber A'ash. This is the book of creation. A'ash is creation, and it's spelled Ayin Shin, or Capricorni Numeticae, which is the goat of the spirit, which is a kind of interpretation of the letters Ayin Shin, right? We have, you know, Ayin corresponds with Capricorn, with the goat, and then Shin is like the letter of spirit here. And a lot of that symbolism of those 2 letters appears throughout the book. Also a lot of symbolism of Baphomet here. And this one, again, is definitely a place where we see very definite instructions in sex magic. I find this kind of a frustrating text in a way, because there are portions of it that I feel pretty clear that I understand what's going on. And then all of a sudden, like, I'll completely like it almost sort of leads you into thinking you know what's going on, and then really like pulls the rug out from underneath your feet. Yeah, a really intriguing, but also difficult text. So yeah, I mean, I think portions of it are fairly accessible, but other portions of it are quite obscure. And this is another place where I think the kind of trickiness of it and the strangeness of the process of interpreting it is actually something that we can think of as like a feature of the text itself. Yeah, so really, really interesting text that you can take a look at. It's under the figure 370, which is the value of A'ash in Hebrew, right? Ayin is 70 and Shin is 300. All right, and then last one here. This is Liber 813 or Ararita under the figure 570. So 813 is the value of this Hebrew word or Hebrew Notaricon, Ararita. 570 is much more interesting. I'll leave that to you to investigate. So what Ararita is, it's 7, well, so we'll talk about the word Ararita is connected to the hexagram and is used in hexagram rituals as a power governing the powers of the hexagram. And so what it is, it's an Tarkon, it's an abbreviation. In Hebrew, Ararita is Aleph, Resh, Yod, Tav, Aleph. So the spelling you see there of the word Ararita is just a direct transliteration of the Hebrew. A 7-lettered name, again connected to the 7 planets and the powers of the 7 planets. And this is an abbreviation of the Hebrew phrase, apologize for butchering the Hebrew, but it's something like Echad Rosh, Ekadutho, Rosh, Yekadutho, Tamaratho, Echad, which means one is his beginning, one is his beginning, one is his individuality, or one is his permutation. Hold on, sorry, I'm getting this in the wrong order. Let me. It's expressing the the unity and the oneness of the divine. Let me just make sure I'm getting this. Oh, one is his beginning, one is his individuality, his permutation is one. So yeah, expressing the oneness of things, and is connected to the symbol of the hexagram, where you see the 7 planets, but an understanding of the unity behind those 7 powers. So there's 7 chapters. Each chapter is attributed to one of the letters of Ararita. So this is chapter 1 here, attributed to the letter Aleph. Each chapter follows the same basic structure. You have 14 verses, numbered 0 to 13. And those numbers are really important. In some of the other books, you'll sometimes see verse numbering, like the symbolism of verse numbering being important, but not always very consistently. But in this one, you definitely see it. So yeah, let's see, we're only 15 minutes over. Maybe we'll take, if that's okay with everybody, we'll take 5 minutes and we can talk real quickly about this chapter. Yes, that is Arabic. And that was one of the things I wanted to say about this, because it's, with Latin or something like that, you can just Google a Latin word and without too much difficulty, or, look it up in a dictionary. But Arabic can be difficult to approach if you don't know even the Arabic alphabet. So what this Arabic is here is actually the text of an entire chapter, or one of the Quran. It's the shortest one. It's Surah 112, the 112th, the Surah or chapter of the Quran, in the shortest one. So apologies for butchering the Arabic, but this is something like Ulhu Allahu Alad, Allah Samad, Lam Yalid Walam Yalad, Walam Yakun Lahu Kufuwan Ahad. And this is this text, this chapter of the Quran, Crowley actually used as a mantra, and he used it especially during the time when he was doing the vision and the voice working. So the time he received this text, he would have already been very familiar with that Arabic from his usage in it during the vision and the voice working, where he used it as a mantra, reciting it, I forget exactly how many times, but more than 1,000 times a day while crossing the desert, and then bowing, doing like a full bow, forehead to the ground after each recitation. And so you can find lots of different translations of it, or interpretations of it. Really, the Quran can't be translated. The Quran only exists in Arabic. Any translation is really just like a giving of the meaning of it in another language. So the meaning of this in English is something like, say, He, Allah, is one, Allah, the eternal refuge. He neither begets nor is begotten, nor is there any like unto him. So really expressing very much a very, very similar idea to what we saw with the formula Ararita, expressing the absolute oneness and unity of the divine. And we see that even in the verse numbering here, right? We're numbering up to verse 13 each time. 13 is the value of the Hebrew word echad, which means unity. Okay, so I'll just read the chapter and then we can sort of see a little bit of the some of the symbolism of it. All right. O my God, one is thy beginning, one is thy spirit, and thy permutation one. So kind of interpretation of Ararita there. So now, actually I'll talk about the symbolism sort of as we go through. So the numbers 1 through 10 are going to correspond pretty closely to the Sephiroth. So 1, let me extol thy perfections before men. 2, in the image of a sixfold star that flameth across the vault and name, let me reveal thy perfections. So again, the sixfold star and the idea of the hexagram here. And now we enter more very specifically into Sephirothic imagery. So 3, thou hast appeared unto me as an aged god, a venerable god, the lord of time, bearing a sharp sickle, right? So this is Binah, the sphere of Saturn. This is very obviously an image of Saturn. 4, thou hast appeared unto me as a jocund and ruddy god, full of majesty, a king, a father in his prime. Thou didst bear the scepter of the universe, crowned with the wheel of the spirit. So 4 is Hesed, which is the sphere of Jupiter. This is very obviously images of Jupiter and of Zeus. Hesed means majesty, and we see that word appear in the verse. All right, and then 5, so corresponding with Gevurah. Thou hast appeared unto me with the sphere of Mars. Thou hast appeared unto me with sword and spear, a warrior god in flaming armor among thine horsemen. Now 6, this will correspond with Tefereth in the sphere of the sun. And Tefereth means beauty and also has the significance of harmony. Thou hast appeared unto me as a young and brilliant god, a god of music and beauty, even as a young god in his strength playing upon his lyre. So very specifically, Apollo is the image here, who is a solar god. All right, and then 7, thou hast appeared unto me as the white foam of ocean gathered into limbs whiter than the foam, the limbs of a miracle of women, as a goddess of extreme love, bearing the girdle of gold. Right, so this is Aphrodite and the white foam. I won't explain it here, but this is a reference to the story of Aphrodite's birth. All right, and then 8, and this will be Hod, the sphere of Mercury. Thou hast appeared unto me as a young boy, mischievous and lovely, with thy winged globe and its serpent set upon a staff. Right, very obviously a symbol of Hermes. All right, and then 9, this will be the Sephirah Yesod and the moon. Thou hast appeared unto me as an huntress among thy dogs, as a goddess virginal chaste, as a moon among the faded oaks of the wood of years. Right, so this is Artemis or Diana, the moon goddess. All right, and then verse 10, but I was deceived by none of these. All these I cast aside, crying, begone, so that all faded from my vision. Right, the duality and multiplicity of these appearances is rejected. 11. Now remember, 11 is the image of magic and of the union of the 5 and the 6, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Also, I welded together the flaming star, the pentagram, and the sixfold star, the hexagram, in the forge of my soul. And behold, a new star, 418, that is above all these. Remember that 418 is the value of the word abrahadabra, which expresses the union, of the 5 and the 6, the microcosm and the macrocosm, in the accomplishment of the great work. All right, in verse 12, even so was I not deceived, for the crown hath 12 rays. So the crown here is Kether, and Kether is often depicted as having 12 rays. 12 is also the value of the name Hu, what is that? He, Vau, Aleph, which is a divine name attributed to Kether. And then 13, unity again. And these 12 rays are one. And so now you've got 6 more chapters that basically follow this pattern. Though as you go on, the pattern, it starts to deviate somewhat. But the first sort of 3 or 4 chapters here can, with what I just said, you can definitely interpret the first 3 or 4 chapters, I think, pretty securely. And then after that, things get a little more complicated. Another one that I think is pretty approachable, though, again, I think like some of these others, the highest and deepest secrets and understandings of these things are very, very high and exalted spiritual things. So that wraps things up. We went more than 20 minutes over, but even as it was quite a whirlwind tour. But I hope that's kind of a basic introduction. Let me say a few things, if anybody wants to hang out for just another minute, about where you can get access to these things. Now, of course, the main source would be the Holy Books of Thelema. This is the paperback edition. And then I also have the hardcover edition here as well. The hardcover edition is really nice. These are both out of print and can be a bit expensive. There's without its dust jacket. The hardcover edition usually goes. I don't think I've ever seen one for less than about $150, $140. The paperback used to be fairly cheap. I paid about $25 for this, maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. but it's gone up in price. But if you look around, you can probably find a fairly affordable copy. Some of the holy books, and that'll include all of the holy books that we talked about today, as well as the Book of the Law. They're not the Vision and the Voice or the Power is Working. Some of the holy books have been reprinted. A lot of other books of Crowley's, like in Book 4, you can find some of the holy books, they're not all of them. And you can also find all of them online without too much difficulty, though there are definitely some errors in some of the online texts, so I would encourage you to be pretty careful and maybe skeptical about online versions of the texts. Again, because these things are their revealed nature, means that changing even so much as the style of a letter is problematic. Any kind of error or typo in them is potentially a danger to the process of interpretation. So yeah, definitely be careful with online stuff, though. Finding things online is definitely better than than not having them at all. And if you can find like PDF scans of books or things like that, do what you need to do. I think here getting access to these books is important. If anyone needs like advice or anything like that about those, you can do that. And actually one more thing, Conjoined Creations published a small hardcover book of Thelema as well. It's just called Thelema. This also contains all of the holy books and is pretty affordable. It's pretty small, so I use it just kind of as like a pocket or like travel edition. But it has everything in it as well, and is actually probably more accurate. So that would actually be my main suggestion if you're serious about these things and don't already own a copy, to look at it's Conjoined Creations, which is a nice small independent publisher. They're actually based in the Bay Area here. I know some of the people involved with them. So yeah, check them out. If anybody has any questions about sources or anything like that, feel free to email me or anything else. Feel free to get in touch with me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.